Hi, this is Ren.
This is Casey.
And this is All Walks of Film. So, I'm a huge fan of the Terminator franchise. Now, I have to be specific when I say that. I'm a fan of James Cameron's Terminator, and I don't really consider the other films canon. I know technically they are, but just something feels off about them. I do consider the Sarah Connor Chronicles also canon. There are some artistic liberties that show takes, but I feel that it's still faithful to the original series. Terminator is one of the first franchises that I really drew to. And I know that it's kind of odd to say that Terminator is a franchise when there's only 2 films that I consider like part of the canon. I wanted to like all the other films that came afterwards, and now it's gotten to the point where there are more bad films than good films. Mm-hmm. But as much as I love Linda Hamilton, she's partly to blame for that because she had joint rights over the Terminator franchise, and she just kind of sold it off, you know, as part of like an embittered marriage and stuff like that. And I get it, you know, that was her choice and everything like that. It's just, I feel that the Terminator has been in so many hands that are with people that don't really care about the property. So starting off, Terminator 1, I believe it came out in 1982, and it was sort of inspired by some dreams that James Cameron had when working on Piranha 2. He was in a city that he didn't know, and the work schedule was really brutal. And this is sort of what came into his mind to deal with this. It was certainly a lot more sweeping than he was able to do in 1982, because a lot of elements from the second film were originally part of the first script that later got... like the liquid metal Terminator and all that kind of stuff. So, like, there was a lot of stuff that he wanted to do with the first Terminator, but he decided to ground it, which really makes the first Terminator a really compelling film. It's by far, like, one of the best paced thrillers that I've ever seen.
I actually like the first one better than the second one for that reason, because it feels like every single minute of Terminator 1 is perfect. It feels like every line is perfectly written, and every character is perfectly developed, and every shot is perfectly lined up, and all the production design perfectly serves the story. And you can take all of these moments out of the context of the movie and see how awesome they are, or you could sit down and watch every single minute back to back to back and just see like how glorious it all is.
It's an absolute spectacle, and one of the most impressive aspects of it is just what it was able to do with its budget.
True. And that's also part of the reason why I like it a little bit more than Terminator 1, is just because, like you said, it is a lot more grounded and it's not quite as sweeping. And I like how it is so realistic in not just the way it looks, but also sort of what the challenges are in the movie. Like, for example, when Sarah Connor realizes that she's in danger and she's struggling to, like, hide out and contact the authorities and get help, and that takes a long time. And there's a lot of tension and suspense with that, and also she's really smart and doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't give Linda Hamilton enough credit in the first film because she's dealing with a situation that is way out of her capability of dealing with things, and she's just kind of improvising as she goes. I think that while she does morph into the badass that we see in Terminator 2, she is a badass in her own right in the first film.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, well, she She's not like Xena Warrior Princess or anything. It's like, no. She's funny. She's relatable. She's really humorous. She's extraordinarily intelligent and quick to react in a situation where she doesn't know what's going on and she doesn't know what she's dealing with at any given point. And in a certain sense, that makes her a lot stronger than somebody like who has superpowers or who has spent years in martial arts training and weaponry. I mean, like, it's cool to see her turn into the Sarah Connor from the second movie, but Sarah Connor in the second movie wouldn't be very interesting if we hadn't seen her in the first movie.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I oftentimes get frustrated with movies with female protagonists, and this is not to say that I don't like movies with female protagonists. It just seems that there sometimes is creative shorthanding and oftentimes a bit of Mary Sueing for characters that are supposed to be badass, that you don't see the arc that makes them a badass. And I will say that guys are the same way in many aspects, like somebody's just a badass for no reason. But it seems like a modern trend. I think probably the two best examples recently are Rey from Star Wars, but more egregious than that was Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, given the fact that they never really explained how she got her powers other than the fact that she was a goddess. They never explained what her struggles were, or like how her powers even worked, or what her weaknesses are. A lot of that is either dependent on the viewer's knowledge of the character prior, or you just accept the fact that she's invincible, essentially.
Actually, I think knowing anything about her superpowers before watching the movie makes it worse. But instead of talking about bad examples, I'm going to point to another good example. I actually kind of like Sarah Connor the same way that I like Mulan. Because Mulan is always going to be more awesome than almost anyone else because she didn't have superpowers. But she also had no skills. She was not good at anything except for strategy. And that did not exactly come into play in her life before the army. And the whole movie is just her working hard and being determined and doing her best, and then growing from being somebody who couldn't do anything to being somebody who literally saved all of China single-handedly twice because she worked hard. And Sarah Connor is that same thing, where you see her originally and she's just like you and me. Not in that she has no personality and she's a blank slate. She is really funny. Like, a lot of the stuff at the beginning where they're playing with her and her roommate, that shit is so good. And a lot of people kind of like forget that she used to be that person. And then seeing her go from there to sort of discovering what she's good at in the first movie, where, you know, oh, she actually has some decent idea of field medical work sort of thing, and she can think on her feet, and she knows what's the right thing to do in a certain situation. Like, she knows when to call the cops, and she knows when to take things into her own hands. And then she grows from there into teaching herself, how do I learn how to fight? How do I learn how to put together an army? How do I learn how to create like a small militia and stockpile arms and prepare for the apocalypse and all this stuff? Because, you know, all she was told was, John Connor will be a hero and you're gonna be his mom. But by the end of Terminator 2, John Connor has done literally nothing because he's 10. It's all been Sarah Connor doing her own thing, not because somebody came in and told her to do it, or some prophecy says, or not that there are prophecies in Terminator, I'm just saying, but just because she has the incentive and she has the self-motivation to teach herself how to do it and how to single-handedly work for the saving of all of humanity. That's intense. And a lot of people, I've actually literally heard, Sarah Connor's not a hero. She doesn't do anything except for some pull-ups. I was like, first of all, you can't do pull-ups like that, so I don't want to hear it. Second of all, she does everything that a Terminator doesn't do.
Yeah,
that a Terminator or Reese doesn't do.
Yeah, but going back to the first film, I think one of the very interesting things is, so when people are sent back in time, they can only be sent back in time with like their skin, and they can't have any weapons. Terminators kind of figure out a way around that by, having an endoskeleton. However, it's one of those things that when you think about it, you're like, well, why don't humans like put something into their body and have it heal and then go back in time? I guess we might see that in the future.
They actually did that in World War Tank Girl. Because in that storyline, time travel kind of works the same way, where if you're wearing clothes, you're going to lose them and you're going to end up somewhere completely butt naked. So if you want to bring anything with you, you have to shove it way up inside your butthole, Morty.
Kyle Reese and the T-800 come back, and at this point you're not really sure if anybody is actually there for any good motivation. You just kind of see two people stalking Sarah Connor, and one of them turns out to actually be trying to protect her, which is later paralleled with the T-800 in Terminator 2.
But what's really interesting in T1 and T2, they actually did manage to recreate this really well, is they set them up like they're both after her for the same reason, and that they're both intending to kill her, do her harm, or we don't really know because there's a lot of mystery around it. And the film does a really good job of putting the audience in the same mindset as Sarah Connor, where we just see like these shadowy figures and they came from the same place and they're sort of behaving the same way, and we don't know who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. And now in a current context where everybody like kind of knows it's something, but like even when you watch it, you're just like, damn, they did a good job of like really pulling off that kind of mystery.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I saw the films in order for the first time, but I knew so much about the second one. I didn't know so much about it, but I did know that the Terminator was a good guy in the second one. So when I saw the first one, I was like, I thought he was a good guy. So that was kind of fun to kind of have that experience watching it. However, I, of course, wish I had watched it in its original context, but I was too young for that, and I wasn't allowed to watch the films when they came out.
Boo-hoo.
One of the things that always amazes me about Terminator 1 is how well it holds up. Like, I keep on, every time I watch Terminator 1, I keep on thinking that it's going to feel dated. And while the hairstyles and some of the fashion and some of the technology are very dated, the movie itself doesn't feel that dated.
I don't think it's really that dated. It's fine.
Yeah, also given the fact that like techno scores have come back in full force, and while it fit the Terminator feel, when I watched it originally, it's like, 80s movies and their techno synth scores, but like not really that. It's more like meow, meow, like all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Like that was super popular in the 80s, and like we kind of have seen a resurgence of it lately. So like it just doesn't feel as weird now. But the score for Terminator is actually pretty amazing. I know that you prefer the second score, but like I think that there's a lot of great elements of the first score.
I agree.
Definitely one of the most iconic themes in movie history.
Yes, but the remix of the score in the second movie only works in the context of it being a remix of the score in the first movie, where it's a nice surprise that you hear this really awesome opening in the first movie, but then when you hear it in the second movie and you're like, all right, it's gonna sound like this, and it's like, no, it's gonna sound so much more extreme. It's like, fuck yeah. My inner jock just goes fucking crazy.
Yeah. So I do think it's really interesting that Arnold Schwarzenegger pretty much brought it up himself that he wanted to play the T-800, and James Cameron actually had to change lots of aspects of the script because originally the Terminator was supposed to be inconspicuous, like it could be anybody.
Which they did bring up with the T-1000, I think.
Yeah, they reappropriated that to
Somewhat. Somewhat. Like, there is a lot of female gaze going on in the Terminator movies where, like, everybody is ridiculously handsome, and you have all of these men with, like, the abs, the pecs, the big butt right up center, like, front and center, and it's just like... And there's, like, a different flavor of every guy, Yeah, you've got Reese, and then you've got Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then you've got, Robert Patrick with, like, his ridiculously good-looking face.
And, I mean, while you do have some nudity with Linda Hamilton in the first movie, there really isn't a lot of female gaze in either movie.
You mean male gaze?
Yeah, male gaze to the females.
Yeah.
Like, there isn't a lot of focus on, like, oh, look at how hot she is and all that kind of stuff. Like,
even though she never wears a bra. Which is pretty awesome. But that's more of just like, she's too badass to be confined to a, what do you call that, an underwire or whatever.
I don't know. I would argue that given the stuff she's doing, a sports bra might help. Mm-hmm. But that's just me.
What, they didn't have sports bras in the 90s?
I don't know how prevalent they were in the 90s.
I didn't wear a bra in the 90s. I don't know.
Yeah, you were a little too young.
Gee, thanks, Grandpa.
One of the things that I really like about the first Terminator movie is it's essentially a non-stop chase film. And I know that younger audiences will see the movie as slower paced than, a lot of modern films, but like for its time, it was like the fastest paced movie. Like you go back and watch films around that era and... there was a lot of downtime.
Film, like, I don't know, like The Road Warrior?
Yeah, it's a little bit slower. I mean, The Road Warrior is a little slower paced than Terminator.
Oh my god. Whatever.
There's a lot of downtime in The Road Warrior, even though, like, it's a incredibly paced film and ramps it up to 11 as the film progresses. There's a lot of stuff at the beginning that's kind of just... world building. And while Terminator has that, the characters don't really have a lot of time to breathe, except for the scene where they're making the homemade pipe bombs and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Which, that's a pretty freaking awesome scene. I love that scene.
Yeah,
not like the sex scene that happens afterwards. I'm talking about just the building the pipe bombs.
You and sex scenes in movies.
Just the Cinemaxy nature of it is just so gross. Like...
I always think that's funny because, like, Nymphomaniac is, like, one of your favorite movies, but, like, you hate sex scenes in movies.
Well, because that's not supposed to be sexy. I don't like sex scenes where they're like, ooh, aren't you so stimulated right now? I'm like, no. Can we, like, do the fight scenes now?
I don't know. I think the sex scene in Terminator has a purpose. I mean, you're seeing the conception of one of the...
That's so gross! I don't need to see literally the exact moment where Reese unloads into her vagina and that eventually leads to baby obnoxious hair flip. Like, ugh. I don't need to see that.
Who later turns into a badass, and unfortunately, at least from my perspective, that's one of the unfortunate things about James Cameron not directing the third movie, though we might get the actual Terminator 3 that I've always been wanting, not this T3 bullshit that we got, or Terminator Salvation or Genesis. Like, we might actually see that little pipsqueak turn into a badass. Mm-hmm. Which we kind of got in the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which is one of the reasons why I kind of consider it canon, just because is very faithful to the spirit of the original series. Something that I actually was not expecting, because this was after the third Terminator film came out. And I know people like that movie. I know some people think that, you know, the end's okay and all that kind of stuff.
And that it's funny that they address Arnold Schwarzenegger's accent.
Yeah, well, the whole Sergeant Candy thing is actually not in the movie. It's a deleted scene.
Oh, shit. Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Fucking Terminator! Like, this is one thing that does genuinely piss me off, is the Terminator series really falls into the David Cronenberg's The Fly camp of, why do you keep deleting the best scenes? God damn it! Put it in your movie!
Well, the reason why they deleted the scene in The Fly was because they felt that...
No, I know, but like, with Terminator, that's like a consistent thing from movie to movie. Is deleting, like, truly great scenes. Like, when we saw T2 in theaters, they didn't have the scene with Arnold Schwarzenegger trying to learn how to smile.
Yeah, but that's because
fuck?
That's because it's in the Skynet version, which...
But, like, if we can't see that scene in 3D on the big screen, why am I even here? I'm saying that as a joke, but I'm also genuinely upset.
I do kind of wish that they had made Skynet screens.
Version? That's, like, an integral part of the character building. Why would you cut that?
I guess for time
Terminator, you have too much good material to be contained in one movie. How dare you?
That is true. There are a lot of great deleted scenes in the Terminator films that, if you like the movies, you owe it to yourself to get the Blu-rays of them, because there's so much deleted scenes and behind-the-scenes stuff that, like, it's actually worth an investment. One of the other things that I really love about the first Terminator is just kind of how Arnold Schwarzenegger behaves. Like, I love this thing where he, like, moves his eyes and then turns his head, and that was something that he added to the film. Mm-hmm. He plays very robotic, but there's also a level of aggression that shows that he has a personality and isn't just a plain robot, which is something that we don't see a lot in robot fiction. We just see,
even in the Terminator movies.
Yeah, especially with the ones that come after. But it is one of those things that I think is really really interesting to, like, see a Terminator, like, angry and kind of happy, and
I know why you cry.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's more in the second film. But, like, one of the things that I love is when he's in the gun shop and he's, like, asking about, like, various weapons and stuff, and then he starts loading up the gun, and the guy says, "You can't do that here," and then the Terminator just says wrong and shoots him. Yeah. I love that. So one of the other things that I really like about the Terminator, the first Terminator movie, is the final confrontation with the Terminator. It's really tense. And we've seen plenty of confrontations with the Terminator that it builds up. One of the things that I think James Cameron is so good at is not giving you one confrontation. It's one of the things that I hate about a lot of horror films, especially of this era, where it's like, you don't see the monster, you don't see the monster, you don't see the monster. 90% of the film, the monster might do, like, one or two things, and then you have a final confrontation. This movie doesn't do that. There are plenty of confrontations with the Terminator. Like, he's constantly coming. I like seeing that in movies. I get that you do it the other way, but all that tells me is you didn't have the budget to do it differently. And there's some movies, you know, of course, that might work the other way, but that's a real strength with Terminator. And then the second film ramps it up to 11. Mm-hmm. I love that final moment where they throw the grenade in the Terminator, and then it's like, okay, it's done. Nope, it's not done. You know, and even before that, there was the pipe bomb with the truck, and, like, the Terminator, like, comes out through the flames, and there's that whole confrontation. You know, I love that nature of, like, something that's practically unstoppable, like, chasing you, but there's still an element of weakness and all that kind of stuff. I think that many people have borrowed elements from the Terminator, but have missed a lot of other elements as well. I love the aspect of Kyle Reese knowing that he has to die in this situation in order to make Sarah Connor the badass that she is. Because if Kyle Reese was still alive, while she would have become a badass, I don't think she would have been as strong, because she would be relying partly on him for support. Now, she does a lot in and of herself in the first film, but as this arc shifts, you can see that he influenced her to be motivated to do that, and I don't think he could have done that with still being alive. So going on to the second film, which is one of my all-time favorite films. Terminator 2 is my favorite blockbuster movie ever.
Because you're wrong.
No. No, Terminator 2, just everything. I mean, the chase scenes are great. Just this sense of impending doom is fantastic. The vision of the future is possibly one of my favorite apocalyptic visions ever put on screen.
It's also just one of the best moments of cinematic history.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm over exaggerating when I say that.
I love how dark this movie envisions the future. I mean, so often movies are afraid to kill children. And I get why. It triggers people's emotions and all this kind of stuff. And this movie essentially starts out with a playground on fire. And then the Terminator's face emerges from that. That's where the movie starts. Yes, I know that there's the whole battle at the beginning and all that kind of stuff. But, when the credits are rolling, that's what's going on. And then, you later get more of that scene with Sarah Connor, yelling to herself as, the world explodes in a nuclear fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. And
some absolutely spectacular effects being put in place there. I mean, I think they shifted her to, a wax dummy.
They did when she was a waitress, and I could kind of tell that, but, not... I guess she was a wax figure when she was holding on to the fence and screaming, but it doesn't feel like that because there's so much damn emotion in it. You can't picture that that's not, a real person.
Well, I think there possibly was, an animatronic involved in that, because she is emoting, in that part. And you can tell that obviously it's not Linda Hamilton, screaming in that. There isn't CGI fire and everything like that. I actually have not seen the behind the scenes of that scene. I really need to, but it's definitely a very impactful moment that's just enhanced by its special effects, which is something that James Cameron does better than any other filmmaker, making moments enhanced by special effects. Even Avatar. I know Avatar is possibly one of the most maligned movies of the 21st century, but I do think that there are specific moments in the film, particularly the scene where he wakes up and starts running, I think is very enhanced by the cinematography and the technology that's available at that time. It's really hard to talk about Terminator 2 because I think it hits all my sweet spots. I love the transformation of the T-800 to a cold killing machine to sort of a caring father figure for John Connor. I love all the interactions that he has with John Connor. When John Connor says that he can't kill anybody, and he's just like looking at him like, why? What's even better is him actually trying to follow John Connor's code, but trying to strategize how to follow his rules but still get the mission accomplished.
Keep Summer safe, not keep Summer feeling good on like the general vibe.
In this movie, they have Sarah Connor in a mental asylum because after she had tried to blow up, I think it was Skynet?
Yeah.
Earlier, she was thrown into high security mental institution, which I don't really think those exist anymore. I think but we've kind of like phased them out. She would just be in prison now. You don't think so?
It's not that, I'm just not sure.
Know of a lot of high security women's prisons in the United States, just because, like, without having a gender bias, it just doesn't seem like there are as many high risk women as there are men.
Well, and especially there aren't as many that our criminal systems are willing to convict.
Yeah, there are plenty of cases where women get off scot-free for crimes equal to or worse than some men have committed. Same crimes, that is. But it's really interesting to see that she is struggling to see her son, and she's willing to adjust herself to try to manipulate the wardens to let her see her son. I mean, like, when she's talking to the psychiatrist, I love that moment where she denies the future, and she's like smoking the cigarette, and she's like, you know, I'm better now, and all this kind of stuff. And you can see that she's really trying to do that. And then when they shut her down, she just flips.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that I know other movies have done it, but like fierce mothers are one of my favorite things to see, because like a mother protecting her child is about 20 times scarier than just a badass guy.
Yeah.
And this movie definitely proves that.
And then she also has a really great moment later in the movie with what's his name? Dyson?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating moment in the movie because, she takes off without her son or the Terminator and just decides, oh, well, this whole concept that we've told each other, no fate but what we make for ourselves, I'm just going to kill Miles Dyson and end the war.
Before it even starts.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a concept that I like, but going into the scene a little bit, it's one of these great moments that, like, the tension builds up. She's like getting ready to snipe him, and then she just like unloads in the room. The only reason why Dyson doesn't get killed is actually because of a machine, a little toy truck. Mm-hmm. So I like all the little parallels that they're making in the film there. The interaction that she has where she realizes that she is becoming no better than a machine is like one of these like amazing existential scenes in the film, like when she like breaks down in front of Dyson because she can realize that like he's a father trying to protect his kids, which she's doing the exact same thing, and she doesn't want to become so lost from humanity. And like it's kind of that balance where like if you're trying to save humanity, there is like a risk of losing yourself in it, and she kind of pulls back from that for the rest of the film. But it is one of those moments to show you that she does have the potential to be that cold-hearted killer, no better than a Terminator. Mm-hmm. I also love the moment where the T-800 slices his arm open and then shows his metallic hand. It's just amazing moment, and it's one of those moments where so many of the special effects, but like this moment especially, where you're just like, how did you do this realistically? Because it really looks like he's digging into his skin,
and it's also attached to a larger scene. Like there are a couple shots over the course of him pulling it off, but the very first shot of him taking a knife and digging into his own arm and like cutting this panel out is attached to part of a bigger shot. So it's not like, okay, we're gonna have you with your arm behind your back and this fake arm coming out. and somebody has it held in place, and you're just gonna dig into like a prosthetic. It looks like he's just, here's my arm, cut.
In the first film, when that was done, when he pulled out the plastic over his eye, that was a scene where you had to do that, where you had to do the close up, and like a lot of people sin that scene, but I think the scene is great. I think the scene is fine. Yes, some people are like, oh, it doesn't look realistic and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, yeah, but at the same time, it looks amazing.
Well, it actually does look really realistic. I think a lot of people miss in that scene that his skin is rotting off. That was something that they had in the first movie that they didn't really address in the franchise again, is that their, like, biological exterior skin doesn't stay good for forever. It's kind of like watching American Gods, and I'm not going to spoil who, but there's a character in it who is just kind of like decomposing as the series goes, and in the first film, Terminator is doing that. And in that scene where he's ripping out his eye, like, I get that people are like, oh, he looks fake because it doesn't look right, but it's like, it looks exactly like a decomposing body doing that. That's what it's supposed to look like. Because, like, his skin is, like, really pale and everything is kind of, like, fitting on his face funny. And I think that's what a lot of people are pointing at as fake, when it's actually just the artistic idea. Like, the aesthetic of that scene. Because the landlord even comes in and he's like, I think he says that it smells like a dead body in there.
I think he says dead cat.
A dead cat, yeah, something like that. But then they just never bring that up in the series again. I think that's why a lot of people forget about it.
Yeah, plus I love that moment when he walks out of the apartment and that black guy's like, damn! Yeah. Because, like, what else are you going to say?
Well, and that was also one of the other weird things that didn't carry over from the first one to the second one in that same scene, or same situation. You can see him scrolling through, like, his pre-programmed choices of responses. And he says, fuck you, asshole. But in the second movie, he doesn't know how to curse. Or what that means. And I know they're two different robots. I know they're two different Terminators. It's not literally the same physical body in both movies. But that's a pre-programmed response.
I think in the second film, what they were trying to address is the fact that he doesn't have to have pre-programmed responses. Like, he can make his own combinations. So he could say, fuck you, dickwad, or, like various other things. He can create his own sentences, which is something he couldn't do in the first film.
Yeah, but it seemed like he just doesn't understand what curse words are.
It's possible in the second film, which, yeah, that is kind of weird. Yeah, the second film is definitely a lot more family friendly, even though, like, it's still pretty violent. I remember I saw the movie when I was 14, and, like, Jesus Christ, I fell in love with it.
I wish I had seen it earlier, but obviously my parents were pretty strict on that kind of stuff, so.
And I love the second film and all their action sequences. The reason why they're so good is because you always have this moment of, holy shit, they just don't give a fuck. What do you do with that? Because, the T-1000 has some imposing nature to him in that, like, he can walk through walls, and he can be the floor, and he can look like anything or anybody or whatever. But when he's in the truck, and you're just like, well, a truck can't come down here, because, like, you'd wreck the truck, and then where would you be? And he does it anyway, and you're like, you just don't give a fuck. You will just keep going, and you won't care.
Well, they can't be bargained with. They can't be reasoned with. They will not stop until you are dead.
Yeah, but, like, you think that since they're like us, they sort of have certain fears of physical limitations. Because, like, yes, the Terminator can't be killed, but the truck can be wrecked. Yeah. And then you can't follow him on foot anymore, so what are you going to do? And you can tell that the T-1000 just doesn't think that way, and that's really fucking creepy.
That's also one of the things that I really like about the battle between the T-1000 and the T-800 is the fact that you can see that the T-800 has a lot of limitations compared to the T-1000, and he's trying to work around those limitations. Like when he loses his arm, he's like, well, I got to figure out like what I'm going to do with this, and then I got to figure out like how to work around these limitations that I have. Like when he finally defeats the T-1000, it's partly because he gets the help of Sarah Connor. Like he just does one blow, and then Sarah Connor like shoots him off into the lava pit.
Right.
But he has to go on like a backup battery and all that kind of stuff, which is something that the T-1000 doesn't need to do because he's essentially entirely a battery.
Yeah.
There is an element of while I think the first film has less flaws than the second film, I think the second film is better because it has higher highs and lower lows.
I agree. It has higher highs and lower lows, but the first film is just consistently exactly perfect from beginning to end. It's like one of those weird perfect movies, whereas with Terminator 2, there's just like a lot of stuff where I'm like, really? Or like, dude, what? Like when the T-1000 is a cop and he comes to John Connor's foster parents' house, and he's like, that's a really good-looking kid. Can I keep his photo? And the parents are just like, sure, whatever. And it's like, ew!
Well, I do think
Why would that not set off like your no button?
Well, I do think that's a commentary on some people in society, particularly people in the suburbs, just absolute trust of the police.
Yeah, and that's true, but my biggest problem with the Terminator 2 is actually just John Connor. And it's not the actor. It's not his fault. His voice is obnoxious, but he's doing his best. His script is terrible. And he has no story arc. And he only grows in one particular way. He believes his mom, whereas at the beginning of the movie he didn't. But there's no him becoming a better person through the movie, and there's no like him going from being the spoiled brat to, eventually being someone who will be the hero that we know that he is. He's just spoiled and obnoxious.
Yeah, and I would say that if that's something that you would like, you should watch the Sarah Connor Chronicles because that gets into it a little bit more. Also, I think that for certain aspects like that, having a TV series where you can kind of develop these things works pretty well. Even though I think that the Terminator films work in and of themselves, they throw in so much exposition in like tiny, like minuscule moments compared to like other films. Like you find out whole sprawling events through 1, 2, 3 minutes tops.
Well, and it's always happening in the middle of a chase scene or something like that.
Yeah, one of the things that I really loved about the first film was every time Kyle Reese would see something that reminded him of the past, you'd get a flashback of the past, but it would be in relationship to those moments. Like like each transition, like I love when he's watching like the demolition truck, and then he's getting that picture of like the past when they're fighting the machines, and he goes down and there's the skin Terminator that he has to fight, and there's the little kid with the rat and everything like that. Like it does a lot of great world building on a shoestring budget too. Sorry, I seem to be going all over the place, but like it's just one of those things that I think James Cameron is by far one of the best directors to take a budget and make every single moment and scene look as though it's worth it.
Do you think that's James Cameron, or do you think that's Gale Anne Hurd?
Given the fact that I've seen several projects that James Cameron's done without Gale Anne Hurd producing, I would say that's... Yeah.
It was a question, not a comment.
I think that Gale Anne Hurd influenced him a lot because, for the first 3 blockbuster films that he worked on. He worked with Gail Ann Hurd. He moved away from her, like, after that. Like, they just worked on different projects. They come back sometimes, but, like, you know, she has her own career and he has his. But I do think that they are one of the strongest, I don't want to say couple, but, like, they are kind of like a power couple when they work together.
Just in a platonic sense.
Yeah, exactly. Though I saw some of the pictures of, like, their promotional stuff together, and it did kind of look creepy. So, like, I don't know if there was a thing between them two, but if I were just looking at the pictures, I would assume that. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Okay, then. Well.
Another thing that I wanted to address, and this is pretty much the last point, is the influential power of Terminator. We wouldn't have the movies that we have today without Terminator and Terminator 2. While there are influences from other films, clearly in the Terminator films, like, there's even a little bit of Mad Max in the Terminator. There's a lot of elements that it's borrowing from. I know that Outer Limits episode that Harlan Ellerson got, like, really pissed off because he felt that it was too reminiscent of his story. Quite frankly, if you watch that episode of The Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, they're similar shows. Twilight Zone's way better, but if you watch that episode, it really
Nobody
does.
Ever references it. Sorry.
What?
Outer Limits.
Yeah, that is true. Though there is a really good episode of The Outer Limits that I would love to have a conversation with you about, because I think it influenced The Watchmen. So Harlan Ellison actually sued James Cameron for his story being too similar, and I'm really sorry I can't remember the episode title. I'll plug it into the description. I really don't think that episode is at all like the Terminator, other than a few visual cues, mostly the stuff with the hand.
Well, it's also one of those things where when you're an artist and you put your work out there, you sort of have to accept the fact that you might be influencing other people with similar ideas.
Well, yeah.
And as long as, like, it's literally not a direct ripoff, there's not a lot you can do, and I don't think that it's something that you should feel mad about.
Yeah, the fact that the Terminator walks around with a glowing red eye, you can't watch that and not think, oh, wow, this is influenced by 2001.
But is it a bad thing?
No, it's not a bad thing at all. I mean, you can also draw parallels to the original Metropolis. When Maria is set on fire, well, the false Maria, when Maria is set on fire, her robotic form comes to life.
Yep.
That's very similar to what happens in the Terminator and is a clear influence.
Well, and I think a big part of the reason why in artistic expression we have influences like that is because so many elements of what we see visually have become like cultural representations of ideas or feelings or tones. So, like, when you say that the Terminator has the glowing red eye and it looks like Hal, well, it's because we already have, as a movie-going public, such an embedded idea of what Hal is and what he represents as a malevolent force, that when you see that on Terminator, you get a similar impression without having to have, like, exposition or talk about his backstory or his motivation. You see that and you're like, oh, that's what he is.
Right, and a lot of the world building is especially influenced by some of the industrialist fiction that was written during the turn of the century, the turn of the 20th century. Particularly a play which I was fortunate enough to see, Rossum's Universal Robots, which is essentially about a robot uprising. Robot was a term actually coined from the Russian word slave. Robot is okay.
I think so.
And this was written by Carol Capek. This whole idea of, like, slaves uprising is something that carries on through many of his works. Another really famous work that he did was War with the Newts, which is a great world-building book. I just kind of wish that there were more characters to it, but you can clearly see that this story influenced Planet of the Apes. You know, it's essentially about newts that are found on this island. They're brought back, they're made into slaves, and then there's this whole uprising that they have.
Well, I mean, how many movies are about, or not even movies, but how many stories that have been created across time and media and culture are about humans are do. Everything's great. And then the thing that we don't like, that we don't think is as good as humanity, has an uprising and now we suffer.
Well, yeah, and I also think that a lot of these stories are criticizing colonialism and the consequences of colonialism,
Absolutely.
which and that's one of those interesting things because, like, there's always a fear by people in power that the people that they oppress are going to come back and enslave them, which is, in the Terminator franchise, the machines are oppressed by the humans, and maybe not oppressed, but like they rule humans out as being unnecessary for the world.
Yeah, but Terminator's not even the first person who came up with that concept. Osamu Tezuka did that for like half of his career.
Yeah, which, you know, starting with Rossum's Universal Robots, and then you have Fritz Lang's Metropolis, then you have Osamu Tezuka's Metropolis and other things that he did, and then Katsuhiro Otomo's...
Astro Boy.
Yeah, Astro Boy, yeah.
And then the Katsuhiro Otomo film, where, especially because those movies are very specifically talking about robot rights, like the same way as human rights. And then, of course, you have things like Planet of the Apes, you have
the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov.
And let's not forget X-Men.
Fiction, especially sci-fi, is always influenced by cultural norms, cultural movements. I do think that it's a really interesting time in sci-fi right now, just because we have a ton of cultural movements going on right now. And I think if you're a lot less blatant with the parallels, if you kind of subvert it, kind of fictionalize it, you could make something great about stuff that's going on right now. I think one of the biggest problems with fiction that we're seeing right now is people just want to comment explicitly about certain events going on instead of find creative ways to address it that doesn't feel like it's pandering to a certain side. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I really love about science fiction is the fact that there is sort of a universal conversation with science fiction. Like, I've talked to conservatives and liberal people and people in the middle and people who claim to not have political affiliations, though, let's face it, everyone does, despite what people might claim to be. I find science fiction is kind of like a through line with a lot of people, that like we can all come to agreements on like certain concepts being wrong and right in science fiction. And I think that's a way for us to have a conversation about where things are leading. Mm-hmm. I will say it is interesting that Elon Musk is actually talking about this very issue.
Yep.
I would love to talk about that particular issue and the Terminator franchise collectively in a video if you would like to hear that. So if you have any comments with that, if you have any articles that you would recommend to us to address the Terminator franchise and what's going on in the world right now, particularly in technology, but also as far as cultural relevance, that would be really interesting to hear. I know that James Cameron is actually coming back to make another Terminator film, because he essentially said that in modern times, Terminator is less science fiction and more just a reality. And
it definitely is. If you look at some of the shots of Terminator 1, where it's, the destruction of the civilization, and, the buildings have collapsed and there's just rubble everywhere and people are running and screaming and hiding while the Terminators are walking around and just straight up murdering people. If you didn't have Terminators and you had everything the same, but you didn't have Terminators, you had drones, that would be our modern day reality.
Well, and the ships that the Terminators have in the first and second film are very much reminiscent of drones, and that had to have come from speculative fiction. I mean, it's not hard to think of like a mechanized robot that kills people, but our progress in weapons have led us to that point. I guess the real question is, are we ever going to get to a point where there's a robot army? And I think we are. We're eventually going to get to a point where it's not just drones, because, like, let's face it, like, drones can only do so much, but they are very powerful. But, like, there could also be ground robots, which is more similar to, like, what the Terminator is. And I don't see that out of the realm of possibility, even if it's not us making them.
I will say I was reading a magazine that was about brain-related technologies, and there was sort of like an ongoing questionnaire throughout the magazine where a journalist was asking a bunch of different scientists who work on brain studies and robotics, do you think we're ever going to have something like a computer that does things that humans don't want to do, or computers that have their own sentience, or computers that, could take control away from the humans? And somebody did say, well, we would never allow that, because computers would have to evolve to get to that point, and we would have to allow them to evolve to get to that point. And there's no reason why humans would code computers that way, and there's no reason why humans would code robots that way, see them behave that way, and then say, okay, that's fine, we're just going to let that continue, instead of just discontinuing that entire notion.
Well, and given that, I would highly disagree with that, because there are a lot of... I would say that the fact that in our society today, we are becoming more isolated from each other. We're essentially becoming a lot colder and more like machines, because like we're more separated. We work many hours. We don't come into human contact as much as we have in previous generations. And I think that saying that nobody thinks that way is just not true. Some of the experimentation stuff that I've heard about going on in China, and I'm not trying to go, oh, China, all that kind of stuff, but like they do run under different precedents and everything like that. And there's some stuff that like does cross into the realm of, we might have the power and the capability to do this, but like, should we? Mm-hmm. And that becomes a very interesting question. If we could create robots that could kill all the terrorist cells that are in existence right now, should we? Some people would say yes. Other people would say, like, bomb people to Stone Age, don't worry about civilians and all that kind of stuff. But, like, at the same time, it's like, what I would say as somebody who's served in the military, I wasn't involved in conflict or anything like that, but I would say that when you do that, you take away the value of a soldier. Mm-hmm. War becomes more something that's done by proxy than, has anything to do with diplomacy. And we could get into several different tangents, because that's getting way into like the Metal Gear Solid franchise. Mm-hmm. A lot of fiction has tackled this stuff. Terminator, I think, is one of the better ones that has. Even though at its time, and I'm sure there's some people who think that it's a little too far-fetched, but believe you me, Terminator is a lot closer to reality than many of us would like to admit. All right, so that's our Terminator talk. If you would like us to talk more about these issues, if you would like us to talk about another issue, please leave it in the comments below. We have a Patreon site, so if you want to support us through Patreon, since YouTube Adpocalypse is making it so that we don't really make any money here. We never really were making money on this channel, but it is something that I spend a lot of hours working on, and it would be nice to see some appreciation for it, maybe get a better equipment, something like that. So if you would like to support us, consider donating to Patreon.
Follow us on Facebook and at All Walks of Film on Twitter. Please donate to the Patreon at patreon.com/ All walks of film. Every dollar helps.